It's important to express when you disagree with someone because it helps us share our different thoughts and have meaningful conversations. In this lesson, we will learn some simple phrases and strategies to express disagreement in basic English. Remember to be respectful and willing to listen to the other person's point of view, even if you don't agree. Having constructive discussions helps us exchange ideas and learn from one another. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so now before we begin.
That's partly true, but... I see your point, but... Well, you could be right. Yes, okay, but perhaps. I don't think so. I beg to differ. To some extent, I agree with you, but... It sounds interesting, but... That's true, but... Me too, but... I'm afraid I don't agree. I'm not so sure about that. It is not as simple as it seems. I'm not so sure about that. That's not how I see it. Not necessarily. Yes, but... On the contrary. No way. I totally disagree. That seems obvious, but... I accept what you're saying, but... It is only partly true that... That's partly true, but I believe there's more to the story.
Oh, what do you think is missing?
I see your point, but I think there are other factors to consider.
Can you elaborate on what those factors might be?
Well, you could be right. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective.
It's always good to consider different viewpoints.
Yes, okay, but perhaps there's another way to approach the situation.
I'm open to hearing your suggestions.
I don't think so. I disagree with your assessment.
Can you explain why you have a different opinion?
I beg to differ. I have a different point of view.
I'm interested to hear your perspective.
To some extent, I agree with you, but I also have some reservations.
What are your reservations?
It sounds interesting, but I'm not entirely convinced.
What would it take to convince you?
That's true, but there are other aspects to consider.
Could you expand on those other aspects?
Me too, but I think there might be some exceptions.
Can you give an example of those exceptions?
I'm afraid I don't agree. I have a different viewpoint.
Let's discuss our differing perspectives.
I'm not so sure about that. Can you provide more evidence?
I'll try to gather some supporting evidence for my claim.
It is not as simple as it seems. There are complexities involved.
What are some of those complexities?
I'm not so sure about that. I see things differently.
Can you explain your viewpoint further?
That's not how I see it. I have a different interpretation.
Let's try to understand each other's perspectives.
Not necessarily. It could be more nuanced than that.
I'm interested to hear your nuanced perspective.
Yes, but there are some limitations to consider.
What are the limitations we should keep in mind?
On the contrary, I believe the opposite is true.
Let's explore our conflicting viewpoints.
No way. I strongly disagree with you.
Can you explain why you have such a strong disagreement?
I totally disagree. I see things completely differently.
Let's try to find common ground and understand each other's perspectives.
That seems obvious, but there might be more to it.
I'm curious to know what you think is missing.
I accept what you're saying, but I have some reservations.
Let's discuss those reservations and see if we can address them.
But you know, it is only partly true that he got promoted solely based on his skills.
Really? Why do you say that?
That's partially true, but there are additional factors to consider.
What other factors do you think we should take into account?
I see your point, but I have a different perspective on the matter.
Can you explain your perspective further?
Well, you could be right. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
It's always valuable to explore different viewpoints.
Yes, okay, but perhaps there's another angle to look at it.
I'm interested in hearing your alternative angle.
I don't think so. I have a different opinion on this.
What makes you hold a different opinion? Can you elaborate?
I beg to differ. I have a contrasting viewpoint.
I'm curious to know more about your viewpoint.
To some extent, I agree with you, but I also have some reservations.
What are your reservations? Let's discuss them.
It sounds interesting, but I'm not entirely convinced yet.
What additional information or evidence do you need to be convinced?
That's true, but there are other aspects to take into consideration.
Could you expand on those other aspects?
Me too, but there might be exceptions or special cases.
Can you provide examples of those exceptions or special cases?
I'm afraid I don't agree. I have a different perspective.
Let's have a discussion and try to understand each other's perspectives.
I'm not so sure about that. Can you provide more information?
I'll try to provide additional information to support my viewpoint.